who who you are, and what got you so interested in homeschooling, and why African-centered education is important. I understand that's 3 questions rolled into one, but the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, to tell you a little bit more about myself, I'm a mother of 7. Which is one thing that I take pride in the most, which really I feel had a huge influence on my outreach and my dedication and training also in terms of educating other children that will and desire. I am a master teacher. I run a homeschool here in Atlanta of 60 students. I'm the director of Roots to Fruits Homeschooling Cultural Collective. I am an international speaker, best-selling author. And I also am a curriculum architect, so I build curriculums for African-centered schools as well as individual programs from homeschooling to co-ops to just personalized, customized curriculums for families. I also am the founder of the Liberated Minds Black Homeschool and Education Expo, which I love, one of my favorite gatherings each year, which happens normally here in Atlanta, Georgia, every 3rd weekend in July. And my way of getting involved in homeschooling was really just being committed, first and foremost to my own children, and realizing that, I wanted something that was different for them in terms of them being able to reach their greatest potential and live in their true divine purpose. And, after working with children for so long, I really I knew the value of my children knowing their own culture and being in an environment where they were loved. And so initially I had sought a African-centered private school, which my oldest son actually went to for 1 year, and my daughter was right on the heels of him. And so when both of them were embarking on that same age range, I realized that the tuition was just way too expensive. I was living in New York City at the time, and the tuition was about almost $700 a month, $650, and for each child. And I said, wow, that's a lot. Wow. And yet I had vowed that my children would never touch the public school. So the dilemma kind of, it seeps in at that moment. It's like, what other alternatives are there? So I began to just voraciously look online and trying to find resources. I'm thinking maybe I can find some scholarships or, all types of things. I'm looking them up, and I'm not finding anything. But I do come across this thing called homeschooling. And in my mind, I've heard of homeschooling lightweight, right? Haven't heard too much about it, but all the aspects that I've heard about it were just people in music, traveling or actors, things like that. I never realized it was something that anyone could do. And so I began to look up resources for Black people in particular, and I found nothing. I looked up things for anything of indigenous people. I found nothing. And so all I found was white women Christian groups that served, their own purposes, and it really didn't have anything to do with us or our mission. So there was really no resources that I knew about the first 2 years that I embarked on homeschooling. But I was clear once I saw that I could do it and that I was going to try it. I was going to, put that effort in, and I was going to make it happen, regardless of whatever I had to go through to make it successful, until I could find another option, which actually once I got started, I realized there wasn't another option because they were thriving so well. And they were doing just amazing things, and then the time we had to spend together, to share together, was priceless. There were so many other benefits. So that's kind of how I got started initially. You did ask me another question about African-centered education. Did you ask me something about that as well?
Yes, I did, but you answered it. You answered it.
Yeah,
I
you did.
It was important, but you smashed that. Hulk smash. Yeah.
So that was your complete beginning in being an educator as a whole, or was that just your beginning of homeschooling education?
No, I've actually worked in education since I was 16, believe it or not. When I went to high school, I was in a early childhood development program or track in high school. When I went to college, I realized once I got to college, I realized what I was being taught had nothing to do with our African children. And it really was discouraging for me initially. And I began to gravitate more towards our elders and those who were paving the way for African-centered education. And it just drew me in such a way that I really became just mesmerized by the power of us integrating our culture, integrating, our worldview and all of these aspects into educating our own children. And so I just began to study at the feet of our elders, Dr. Ben and Amos Wilson and, just a whole long list that really assisted in cultivating myself. Queen Afua, just a whole, I could go here, have a long list of people, but that inspired me so much that I realized the importance. I always was an educator who had a very high expectations, yet in the beginning there wasn't necessarily an African-centered standpoint, but more a Black cultural aware standpoint, which is a difference. So the Black cultural aware, you know a little bit about your history. It really starts pretty much with what's going on in this country, civil rights or slavery and that type of thing. Right. And you recognize the things that we've come through and that we've, triumphed over. However, African-centered education really focuses more on our African worldview. It's more of a holistic, mentally, physically, and spiritually, developing our children from all angles. And it really connects us to our people around the world through our value system, through how we look at the world, through the foods we eat. It dives into so many different aspects of cultivating our children, from economics, all of those different elements. So it's a different level of awareness of self-identity that goes back thousands of years versus going back hundreds of years.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because I use myself as an example for what you just explained. Every school that I've attended has either been predominantly Black or half Black, half white. Like my middle school was half Black, half white, but it was it was segregated. So most Black people stayed on their side, most white people stayed on their side. So it was. Like middle school was the only time in my life where I had more than one white teacher. So I was one of the few Black people who came up in the educational system where I was taught by Black people, but it was more of a Black awareness thing. And it wasn't a grand awareness, but it's just a peek into there's racism and white supremacy and things that's going on. But when I got to FAMU and enrolled into the psychology program, which is African-centered, so as you said, that holistic learning, that's when I got.
You were there with Dr. Kobe, Dr. Kobe Cambone.
The first class I took.
Was he there?
Yes, ma'am. That was the Black psychology class. Was the first class I took. I still have his books. I took it for 2 different classes. Matter of fact, he was one of my father's mentors that I found out once I got to college.
Powerhouse.
Right.
Powerhouse.
Right.
Yes.
So I'm definitely with you on the importance of African-centered, which would take it further than just being aware or having that surface knowledge of what's going on.